Hi, welcome to this week's Fireside Chat. It's good to be with you. As I'm recording this, or rather as Judy Zarubik is recording this on the other side of the screen, because after all, she's the tech genius that makes everything work so well. It's raining outside, so I'm glad to be inside, even though you can imagine that the fire is keeping us warm. Now, I know that for many of us, it can be frustrating and feel suffocating to have to wear a mask during this pandemic as we look out for one another. However, there are always creative souls who explore the benefits. Some people wonder about the indeterminate length of this pandemic. It just never seems to end as we follow along. You see, the number pi is indeterminate. However, for those of us missing in-person worship, remember the hard pews, or is it just a sound effect? See, pew pew. Still others have learned to abide as they go along with the flow. The more thoughtful among us have taken time to reflect on it all. Any Johnny Cash fans out there? Then there are people who spend far too much time getting their information online from social media, whether it's accurate or not. For those do-it-yourselfers out there, here's a unique take on masks. While some are missing the fall fairs and the decadent corn dogs. This is a do-it-yourself pot of corn dogs. For the trekkers among us, here's a familiar scene with a surprising response and the hilarious reaction. That last Star Trek pun demonstrates that life's reality elicits many differing perspectives on what we communicate and what we experience. For example, the popular perception of our spiritual growth and awareness looks something like this diagram. For most of us, however, this is what we experience. A growing part of my spiritual journey has been wrestling with the legacy of the Canadian residential school system and the generations of harm perpetrated on our Indigenous siblings. The very people who welcomed our ancestors to this land, the harsh climate. The term reconciliation is often touted as the path to healing for all Canadians in the aftermath of residential school and Indigenous survivors. However, reconciliation is an empty phrase if we don't learn while building relationships with Indigenous people. It is a good thing that we recognize the territory on which we gather at the beginning of, but just repeating the words is not reconciliation. In response to this reality, and because tomorrow, September 30th, is Orange Shirt Day, hence this color, I want to share the story of how it came about. Why an orange shirt? First, some background on the origin story. The story I will soon share is one person's experience of, the story of a girl from the Secwepemc people. For more than 8,000 years, their ancestors lived among the Fraser, Thompson, and Columbia rivers of the present British Columbia. The red dots in this map are existing communities of the people, and the yellow dots with an X inside are the villages unoccupied after 1863. the people were welcomed the first white folks that came into the land. However, when more immigrants came with European diseases, especially smallpox and measles, about 2/3 of the indigenous people died of those diseases. The subsequent creation of reserves further confined the people, even though no treaties were ever made and no land was ever ceded. This is not to scale, but it's a picture map of the places referenced in the story we're about to hear, written by Phyllis Webstad, née Jack, about her experience of residential school when she was taken from the Dog Creek Reserve. This story is titled The Orange Shirt Story. While Phyllis's experience was with a residential school run by the Roman Catholic Church, the United Church was also involved in running residential schools over the years. So let's enter into Phyllis's childhood experience as she tells it. When Phyllis was a little girl, she lived with her granny on the Dog Creek Reserve, part of the Saskatchewan Azanatam First Nation. Their home had no electricity and no indoor toilet. In the summer, when the sun was hot, Phyllis would cool herself off in the bathtub full of water that Granny kept in her garden. Phyllis and Granny lived off the food they grew in Granny's garden and berries from the land. Granny and Phyllis would go to the Fraser River and catch fish. They would eat some fish for dinner and dry the rest on the drying rack to save for the winter. They didn't have much, but they got by with what they had. Growing up, Phyllis felt lonely. There weren't many children on the reserve to play with. Each September, the older children, like her cousin, would leave the reserve to go to school. Phyllis looked forward to the day when she could go too. Phyllis didn't get many hugs when she was little, but she did have Granny, and Granny's house was a safe place for everyone on the reserve. There were lots of people who came to Granny for help and advice. Phyllis's favorite place to be was in Granny's kitchen. When Phyllis turned 6 in July, Granny made her a cake to celebrate her birthday. Granny told Phyllis now that she was 6, she was old enough to go to school. When September came to mission for the first time, Phyllis was excited about going to school so she could play with her cousin and the other children. She wanted to find out what happened there and hoped she would make some friends. Before town to buy her a new shirt. They didn't have a truck or a car, so when they went into town, they would take a blue bus that they called the stage. Going into town was exciting. They took the stage down a noisy and bumpy dirt road. Soon, though, the bumps stopped and the noise hushed. Phyllis looked out the window and saw a paved road whizzing by underneath them. The town was so loud and busy with people and vehicles everywhere. There were shops to visit and restaurants to eat in. One shop had a red and white pole outside of it. Phyllis watched it twirl around and around, and she wondered where the stripes were going to. Granny took Phyllis to a restaurant, and they sat in a booth with a mini jukebox. When Phyllis dropped a coin into the slot, the box would play a song for her. Phyllis ordered breakfast with 2 eggs. When they came, they were sunny side up. It was like they were looking at her from the plate. Phyllis didn't know how to eat them. Granny's eggs were always scrambled. After breakfast, Granny took Phyllis to a shop that was filled with clothes and toys. Phyllis picked out a shiny orange shirt that laced down the front. It was bright and exciting. She felt as excited about the shirt as she did to go to school. Granny bought the shirt and they got back on the stage and went home. Phyllis held the bag with her orange shirt in it all the way. She promised herself that she wouldn't wear it until the big day when she went to school. Phyllis waited and waited, and finally The day arrived. Phyllis, wearing her shiny orange shirt for the first time, said goodbye to Granny. Granny patted her on the head and said, "What loves it?" Phyllis got on the stage with all the other children and waved at Granny from the window. It was a 2-hour journey to get to the residential school, much further than Phyllis had ever traveled before. She stared out the window, waiting to see the place where they were going. When they arrived, Phyllis started to feel very scared. The residential school was so much taller than anything she had seen before. The building seemed cold and unfriendly as the nuns who came out of the school to greet them. Phyllis asked her cousin how long they had to stay there. Her cousin said that it would be 300 sleeps before they could go home. 300 sleeps? That sounded like forever. The nuns took the children inside and walked them down a long hallway in single file. In a room, the children were undressed and made to take a shower. Phyllis had never seen water coming out of the walls before. Phyllis didn't want to take off her shiny orange shirt, but the nuns made her. After she had showered, they gave her different clothes to wear. She didn't like them. The nuns put Phyllis in a chair and cut her hair short. She asked for her orange shirt back, but they told her that she wouldn't be allowed to wear it anymore. Phyllis cried, "Give it back! It's not yours, it's mine! My granny bought it for me!" But no one would listen. The residential school wasn't where Phyllis learned. It was the place where the children slept and ate. Phyllis soon realized that the nuns didn't care if she was tired, sick, hungry, or sad. She had to rely on herself. It felt as though she didn't matter. At dinner time, Phyllis and the other children would eat tasteless and almost colorless food. There were pale green moon-shaped beans that tasted awful. And there was smelly fish that definitely wasn't like the salmon that she and Granny used to eat together. At night, Phyllis wondered why Granny was not coming to get her. She would cry herself to sleep. In her dreams, she would play in Granny's garden and go salmon fishing in the river. Each day, the children went into town to attend public school. Before boarding the bus, they picked up a small carton of orange juice and brown paper bags with their lunches inside. Some days, 1 or 2 children got a chocolate bar in their lunch. Everyone would look to see if they had one too, but their lunch bags just had sandwiches in them. It felt like the grown-ups were playing a cruel joke on them. Phyllis took the bus to the public school with her cousin. Every day, the bus driver dropped her cousin off at a different school. Phyllis wished she could go with her. She didn't understand why they couldn't be together. At school, Phyllis learned to read and write with all the other boys and girls, but she was still lonely. All the children from the residential school were lonely because they had been taken away from their homes and their families. Her teacher was a curly-haired redhead. She was as nice as she smelled. She would smile at Phyllis and help her with her lessons. Phyllis wished she could go home with her teacher at the end of the day. She made being at school bearable. Phyllis liked her teacher, but she was no substitute for Granny. She wondered what Granny was doing while Phyllis went to school every day. Phyllis missed her home in the garden. She started counting the days until she could go back again. Each day, the number got smaller. She waited and waited. The other children at school could order books from a book club, but none of the residential school children were allowed to get any. Phyllis didn't understand why they were treated differently. She wanted a book too. Why wasn't she allowed one? In the playground, she was just like the other boys and girls. At lunchtime, everyone played together. Phyllis learned to swing on the swings and would wrap her swing around the pole and watch it unwind. The best time of the day was when the bus came to pick them up after school. Phyllis always saved a seat for her cousin. When it came to her stop, her cousin would run on the bus and plop down next to Phyllis. Sometimes she would bring onions that she picked on the school grounds. Her cousin would say, some? And Phyllis would laugh at her onion breath. But Phyllis was always so hungry. She would grab an onion and eat it like an apple. Her breath smelled just as bad as her cousin's did. On the bus, they learned to sing songs together. They sang, "We are the missions, mighty, mighty missions. Everywhere we go, oh, people want to know, oh, who we are. So we tell them, we are the missions." The seasons changed from fall to winter, then to spring, and finally it was summer again. Phyllis was excited about going home. She never wanted to go back to the residential school or see the cold-hearted nuns ever again. After 300 sleeps, the stage came and took Phyllis back home to the reserve. She was so happy to be back to a place where she mattered, a place where people cared about her. That summer, she stayed at home with her granny. She stayed in her familiar house and worked with Granny in the garden. She went fishing for salmon in the Fraser River, and she ate them for dinner. She had everything she needed, and she never went back to the residential school again. Not every child was as lucky as Phyllis. Now in her late 40s, Phyllis Webstad remembers, "The orange color was always reminded me of my feelings and how they didn't matter, how no one cared. I went to a treatment center for healing when I was 27 and have been on this healing journey since then. I finally get it, that the feeling of worthlessness and insignificance ingrained in me from my first day at the mission affected the way I lived my life for many years." Now, this is Phyllis today, a third-generation residential school survivor. Notice the eagle feather she holds, signifying bravery and courage in life's balance. She was one of more than 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children who attended the Indian residential schools in Canada between the late 1800s and 1996. It is estimated that between 4,000 to 6,000 children, I'll say that again, 4,000 to 6,000 children died at residential schools. Like Phyllis, many survivors are still coping with the trauma from their time at the schools, including physical and sexual abuse. Orange Shirt Day was created as an opportunity to discuss the effects of residential schools and their legacy. The day honors the experiences of Indigenous peoples, celebrates resilience, and affirms a commitment that every child matters. This is how we live into reconciliation, to learn and to grow in understanding. Indeed, this has been a long story today, but I felt it was necessary to tell it fully. So thank you for sticking it out with me. It is by listening and by fostering relationships with our Indigenous neighbors that change may take place, and Phyllis's story will help to change the system for good. What strikes me powerfully is the light. These shared stories shine into our own understanding. Like these stones worn down by the battering of the waves, tossed back and forth, thrown here and there, beauty can arise out of tragedy and horror. I pray that we too would begin to shine light into the world as we work intentionally toward reconciliation. The following prayer is one written by Vivian Ketchum, especially for Orange Shirt Day. Vivian is a residential school survivor who attended Celia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in the early 1970s. The school was located in Kenora, Ontario. Vivian is best known as a writer and photographer who uses her skills to highlight social issues. Let us pray together with our Indigenous siblings. Vibrant God, your creation explodes with the colors of the rainbow. Your peoples revel and reveal the beauty of diversity. We remember today when joy and dignity of a precious child was destroyed. We lament today for the childhoods lost through the residential school system. We mourn for the spirits crushed and the futures compromised. We celebrate the hope and joy of every child, even as we tell stories of resistance that make us stronger. Build the bonds of solidarity to ensure never again. We pray this in the name of the one who was a child among us. Amen. As I was writing this fireside chat yesterday, I found out that the Wesley United Church on Highway 21 within the Saugeen First Nation, just north of us, had caught fire. This is the congregation that Kevin Hart served as their minister for 7 years before his retirement. Once we leave this digital space, please keep Kevin and especially the people of that community of faith in your prayers. News releases since I wrote this have found that they have caught a suspect of the arson, and also an arson of 2 other faith communities within the Saugeen First Nation. I have no idea what the motivating factor was, but I can't help but think and wonder if this individual was so severely affected by the residential school system, by the 60s scoop, by the ways in which our Indigenous siblings are treated in our society, by racism, systemic racism, and discrimination and all the benefits that they are given. The churches perpetrated that system for far too long, and this may have been a response. Again, complete speculation, but I can't help but make the connection within my mind as I think about it all. I want to share with you a blessing rooted in the Mohawk tradition and first published for Orange Shirt Day in 2017. As we share in the blessing, I invite you to consider this painting by Jackson Beardy in homage to the Great Spirit. O Great Spirit, creator of all things, human beings, trees, grass, berries, help us, be kind to us. Let us be happy on earth. Let us lead our children to a good life and to an old age. These are our people. Give them good minds to love one another. O Great Spirit, be kind to us. Give these people the favor to see green trees, green grass, flowers, and berries this next spring. So, when we all meet again, O Great Spirit, we ask of you your wisdom. Until next week, stay well and stay safe. Goodbye.